What are the top three things to consider or do when putting science into your fiction?
Yeah, well, I'd say the first one is to understand the expectations of your genre and the degree to which your reader will expect science to be explored in that genre. Obviously, if you're going to write a hard science fiction novel, the reader is going to expect a very different sort of treatment of the science in the writing than they will if they're reading a softer romance or historical fiction. And it depends as well on the genre how much that science is going to be critical to the plot, whether it will actually produce turning points and constrain the way that the plot and world is set up, or whether it might just be something that colours in the background and adds depth to perhaps the characters or the situations that they're in. But as we pointed out before, in either case, whether it's pivotal or whether it's just adding that richness, the internal consistency is the key. And as I said before, inaccuracies can be a problem if they're unjustified, but not playing by the rules that you've set is probably a bigger problem.
And I mean, that's the reason why scientific theories in the past have, made sense to or lasted for years and years and years, is because they had a logic. They made sense in people's minds, and then when it was proven wrong, that's when so it's the same sort of mind trick.
Yeah, and
in fiction.
It's one of the I suppose the great powers of science that it should be flexible enough to recognise when its own theories are outdated. And I mean, that in itself can be a starting point for stories. When you're writing historical fiction, you may have to take into account the fact that science, as we understand it, or the so-called facts are just the way that we understand things at the moment. So that whole area about genre expectations and how much you need to get into it, I'd say is the first consideration. The second one I would say is that even though we're talking about science, and you still need to make it count, and if it's been built into the story, we really have to see what the consequences are for the character, even if it's just at the line level. If you're going to introduce a scientific concept or some kind of rationale behind an item that you bring into play, then we really need to see how the character reacts to learning that new information, or how that information constrains the plot in some way. Otherwise, including science is a little bit like window dressing. It sort of starts to have that problem that any research can have, which is being added for the sake of the research. It was a cool detail that the author wanted to include, but it doesn't actually serve the story. And so even though we're talking about science specifically, I think that rule still applies as the second point. And the third thing that I would say in terms of the top three things to consider when you put science in fiction is, while many science ideas sound really cool at a structural level, so they sound like they'd be the great basis of a story or perhaps of an ending or a crisis point, actually getting them into the story can be tricky. So you still have to remember that a story is still just a sequence of scenes, and the only way that you can represent those ideas is in scenes. So you have to think about how that scientific idea is going to be shown through the viewpoint of the character. So what are they going to see, hear, taste and touch and smell to bring that scientific idea to light and to life, sorry. And so in the workshop, we'll look at some of those techniques. And these are, of course, broader writing techniques. And they're things like who you're going to choose to be your character, and what foreshadowing are you going to do, and how are you going to build on the prior knowledge of your character and reader in order to have that science make sense.